Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have Chris Howard on the show. Good morning to you, Chris.
Morning, Julian. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Now, you call yourself an adventurer, and I'll call you an adventurer, and you've completed many adventures to date. Like you've rode the Atlantic Ocean, 3,000 miles unsupported. You've done other challenges. Another one I've got from your bio is that you cycled non-stop Paris to Cambridge and did 3 stages of Tour de France over 12 hours on the official program spin bike, which is quite a challenge in itself. Now it is, and at the end of the first COVID lockdown, crumbs 2 years ago, you were inspired to embark on a UK sort of coastal trek after reading about the impacts of lockdown was having on disadvantaged children. So you set out to walk the coast of Great Britain for children in need, this 11,000-mile journey over 450 days, completely on your own, completely unsupported. And so you come with a catalogue of adventures. And so I think for my first question really to you is, why do you do such big challenges? And when did that inspiration start to go for these big challenges?
Oh, that's a really big question. I think, interestingly, I did. So it started when I was quite young. I grew up in a pretty rough area. Didn't have a great childhood. I failed all of my GCSE mock exams, and I felt very quickly that I needed to do something about that. So I learned a very valuable lesson, which was to ask for help. And I did, and 3 specific teachers that I'm still in touch with some 25, 30 years later were really key and pivotal in me actually getting enough exams to get into the 6th form. And I managed to do that, but the exams that I took finished much earlier than other people's exams. It's just the way they fell in those tiers. And I bought a backpack literally a few days before my last exam. It was my first ever backpack, and it kind of represented freedom to me. And I don't know what that meant at the time, but sort of on reflection now, having been writing about it, it represented freedom. And I packed that bag with probably a lot more stuff than I ever needed to take with me, but I booked a ticket to Bangkok.
Is this at the age of 16 or 18?
I was 17 at the time.
Wow. Okay.
And the day I flew out a couple of days after my 18th birthday. And none of my friends knew anything about Thailand or Southeast Asia, and none of my family did particularly either. This was back way before internet was really accessible. I mean, I didn't have a computer, I didn't have a phone, let alone a smartphone. So I was going into a world that was completely unknown with what was effectively a small map in a book. And I met a lot of people backpacking and traveling, in Bangkok, and I spent maybe 3 days in Bangkok when I got there. And what I realized is those guys were there, and as much as I made good friends, they were there for one reason, and that was to have a good time, to probably stay in Bangkok or to go to a beach and drink a lot of beer and have parties. That's all very appealing, especially to an 18-year-old lad. But actually, there was something in the back of my mind saying that this isn't actually what I want. What I want to do is immerse myself in the culture and see things from a kind of non-tourist perspective. I want to be a local, effectively. So I just went off on my own, and I decided to walk the whole of the western side of the archipelago of Southeast Asia, and go to as many, and actually went to all of the islands on the west coast of Thailand.
How far is that?
Well, funny enough, that's about 2,800 miles. So I made it all the way down to Malaysia. And then
So the driver for the challenge wasn't the challenge itself. It was you wanted to explore the culture and the country. I guess that was the driver.
Exactly. I mean, imagine I was an 18-year-old boy that turned up in Bangkok. Everything was a bombardment on my senses. The smells were different, the sights were different, colours, everything. I got off wearing a light grey T-shirt from the airplane, and as soon as I got out of the airport, it was black with sweat because it was just a completely different environment. And I was fascinated. And again, prior to me going out and speaking to people back home, friends and stuff, they were all booking holidays to Spain and Greece and things like that to do exactly what these travellers that I'd met in Bangkok were doing. And I felt like that was a wasted opportunity. And by no means am I like the most purest driven person on the planet. That's not it. It's just that I grew up in a pub and I didn't want to do that kind of holiday. It wasn't a holiday to me. This was something I'd had to work for, and it was something that I needed to use to reinvent myself, I suppose, or to define myself as a human being.
Wow. So that was the start of these sort of doing some big challenges. And then I guess if you go fast forward perhaps to your Atlantic row again, what got you into the place where you thought, do you know what? I'm going to sign up to row across the Atlantic because I can, or I'd like to do that. There must have been something bigger than just exploring, because you wouldn't see any culture there. No, you wouldn't see anybody, to be honest. You just see sea everywhere, I'm sure. So what was behind that then? That was something different.
Absolutely right. And yeah, totally. The driving force was completely different, and something that I'd learned about myself. You know, it was a good 10 years later or 8 years later that I rode the Atlantic. So I'd done lots of other things, but I'd done everything right in terms of societal value and in terms of what I was being told I should do. You know, I'd managed to get into university, I got my degree, and then after my degree, I got a job and I got a car and I got a better job. And then that whole ordinary life trajectory was set there. And I had that epiphany moment, which sounds kind of corny talking about it that way, but I stood up in the office one day and I looked around at all the people exactly the same as me. There must have been 50 people in this open plan office. Some of them had been there 30 years already. And I thought, this is not my life. This is not where I want to be or who I want to be. I'd already been halfway around the world doing other things, and I'd already done a lot of endurance events and things, and I just felt like I shouldn't be doing this every day. I should have been doing that every day and doing this a little part in the day just to get to doing those other things, you know. So I immediately went into my boss's office and said, look, I'm not happy. I'm going to go home and think about things over the weekend, but on Monday I'd like to have a proper chat. And I think that worried him straight away, but he was very supportive, and he said, take the weekend, think about what you need to think about, come in, we'll have a talk, let me know what you're thinking. I went home that night. It was a Friday, and I spoke to my girlfriend at the time, who I was living with and who I'd not long moved in with. And I told her how I was feeling, and I felt bad because we'd just moved into a house together. We'd split all the bills and everything, you know, and I didn't want to tell her I'm going to walk out of my job and leave it all on you. That wasn't what I wanted to do, but I wanted to be honest with her. And she said, well, look, you've done all these things in life, and whenever you've been unhappy, you've changed it. So don't think that you can't now. And at the same time, my best friend had come up to stay with us because he'd 2 weeks before, been medically discharged from the RAF regiment. We'd known each other for years. We'd become really good friends. We'd done a lot of cycling and running together and things like that. And I said, come up and stay with us. He'd been in a bit of a downward slump and didn't know what to do with himself. So I told him as well that night when he arrived. And he said, yeah, well, maybe we should think about doing something then, because I can't stay in this situation. So he said, great. And the following day, we took my girlfriend and her younger sister, whose 18th birthday it was, up to Grantchester Meadows for a picnic. And I don't know if you know, we live in Cambridge, so we have punts on the river, and they'd never done that. So we took them on the punts and we moored up against the banks of Grantchester, and we had this picnic. And it was great. Perfect, sunny, idyllic afternoon. And I turned to Tom and I said, how do you fancy rowing the Atlantic? And he immediately, and I knew that he'd been a rower at university. I'd never rowed in my life.
So where did that come from for you? That seems a random thought. It probably wasn't a random thought, but where did that row the Atlantic?
He the night before he'd said to me, oh, well, maybe we could do some more cycling in Europe or cycle over to France again or something like that. And I just sort of thought, well, we've done that. And I guess somewhere in the back of my mind that night when I was lying in bed, I was just thinking about the darkness and lying there and what it would be like to be on an ocean or floating, you know. And I don't really feel like it was something that I wanted to do all my life. I didn't think it was something that I'd ever thought about really. So I just said it to him like that on the meadow, and his immediate response was, "Don't be stupid, you know. And I thought that was it. It was shut down, and it would be put out of my mind completely. But the thing is, we had the first generation of iPhones at that point, and so we had the 3GS, which meant we had access to internet in our hands, which we'd never had before.
Mm.
And after about 10 minutes of being sat in silence and me feeling pretty deflated, he turned to me and said, "Actually, do you know, it's not impossible." And that was it. Like, that was the spark. And then so 2 years later, having planned a campaign and trained and fundraised and got a boat, etc., we left, and we completed, rowing the Atlantic unsupported, which was and it was amazing because a lot of our friends and families were quite negative about it. They didn't believe we would do it. They didn't think we could do it. And again, at the time, you know, this is over 10 years ago now, so it wasn't something that was particularly common. Ocean rowing has grown massively in the last 10 years, but back then, very, very few people were doing it. And it made us feel like we were part of a very exclusive club, you know.
Mm. So with all that, well, with the challenge in front of you, and obviously, you know, as I know, with sort of, I'm coaching, you know, the GB row sort of teams, there's a lot before you get there. So actually, even before you start, there's a huge thing. How did you deal with that negativity around you, where people were like, just couldn't understand why you're doing it, and kept saying you can't do this, or why? How did you? Because it's really hard, and particularly close family might be saying it, and you don't want to be rude with people. But how did you sort of process that and then keep going to pursue that?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and you hit the nail on the head there with you know, it's a massive build up to the event before the event itself. In some respects, the rowing itself is the easy part, but getting to the start line is so challenging. Not just because of funding, but because you get all this emotional barrage from people, and almost like emotional blackmail. You shouldn't be doing this. You know, you can't do this. You're putting yourself at risk. Why would you do that to your friends and your family? It's not. You get all of these negative comments, but we were lucky that we had a good set of people around us training us. So we got in touch with a couple of ex-Marines and an ex-para PT, which was great. He met with us every day for free. He gave us a nutrition plan, and they would say to us, both the Marines and the para, they would say to us, anything negative, use it as fuel, turn it around, make it into a positive for you that day, even if it's just to get your next set done, even if it's just to get your net erg session on. And I remember the Marines telling us that you have to think, all your life, as athletes, as people in sport, and people that perform to a high level, you've been told to perform at your best when you feel your best. But you guys are going to need to perform at your best when you feel your worst. And so that stuck with me. And it wasn't just about how bad we felt on the ocean. It was about how bad we were feeling when people gave us negativity. So Tom and I came up with a little mantra for ourselves, which was literally just get it done. And that was what we would say to each other. And that was what we would say to other people when we needed something. And it became infectious, you know. And now I look back on it and think, actually, it was kind of dogmatic and kind of egoistic. But the thing I learned from that whole experience about being positive and trying to push yourself and think positively in the face of other people's negativity is that you've got to sort of get away from self-limiting beliefs, and you've got to believe in yourself and have the confidence to step outside that comfort zone.
That's interesting, that advice from the Marines, where, you know, it's easy to, I guess, go for things when you're feeling great, or people supporting you and cheering you on. You get the energy. I mean, I've done not such big events like yourself, but and you got the crowds behind your supporters, and it feels good.
Yeah.
But when you're in the middle of the ocean, you've got none of that. Clearly, none of that.
Got no one cheering you on. Yeah.
And when you are, you know, I've done Ironman, but that was, and you have moments when it's really tough along the way. But you get, you know, somebody comes alongside you, you're doing well, great, you know, all that encouragement, the crowd, and it keeps you going. But when you haven't got any of that, nobody cheering you on, it's really tough. So, apart from your mantra, I'm sure there were some moments on that row, that's sort of 3,000 miles rowing, that you thought, why are we doing this? How are we going to get out of this? There must have been some really difficult situations. Is there any highlight, a low light that you actually had to dig deep mentally
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, when I've spoken to people about our row, and even people that have done their own row, they're quite shocked in terms of, one, how long it took, and two, the things that went wrong. So if you can imagine anything going wrong on a boat, it went wrong on our boat. And that wasn't down to lack of preparation. It was down to the fact that we had a pretty bad weather window that year. So we had 3 mid-Atlantic cyclones. We hit a container at night. So we sprung a leak in our hull, which meant our battery compartments flooded. So then we had no navigation systems. We had no lights. We had no power at all. We lost our water maker because it was a Catadin and the filter corroded. So we had to strip it, put it back together. I think I did that about 10 times before I managed to get it working again. But that was 10 times over 15 days in 40-degree heat, where we were only rationed 1 litre of water a day. And we were still rowing 12 hours a day. So, we went through hallucinations, form of hysteria. We both had skin infections. We were both malnourished. We planned for a 60 to 70-day journey. So we took 80 days worth of food. So we then had 25 days at the end where we were literally on bare minimum calories because we were trying to eke everything out. We had to eat fish. We were nearly rescued by a grain ship from America, but we politely declined the offer to come aboard. We wanted to get across. It was never really an option for us to be rescued or to quit. It was just, we were going to get across by any means. And then the captain.
So in those difficult, I mean, you've named a catalogue of incidents there, which are probably more than you say that most people have experienced on Atlantic Row nowadays. How do you deal with that in that very moment, the mental side of it? Because it is a mental thing, isn't it? The physical piece is, yes, it's difficult when you're feeling tired and all that, but it's the mental piece. How did you? I mean, was it just your mantra, or was it something else? What did you learn on reflection?
Do you know, the mantra went out the window when we left port? Like,
right? Okay.
It became very scary very quickly, and but that was a good thing, and we used that fear to sort of keep us together and keep us going, and we became very reliant on each other, because a lot of people will tell you, even if you do it in a crew or in a team, rowing an ocean can get quite lonely because of the shift pattern. You feel quite isolated, and especially at night, and it's easy not to talk to each other. So we put a process in place where we would stop every single day. We would eat together. So that was no rowing. So we would spend half an hour, we would eat dinner together, we would talk and check in with each other. Breakfast, one of us would be eating breakfast on deck while the other one was rowing. So we were still talking to each other face to face, and just having that kind of connect, able to check in together it did a lot for morale. It helped us reason problems through, and it helped us sort of scenario plan before problems happened. So we always thought, there's potential that this could happen. What do we do in the event that, say, the water maker broke? So we'd learn everything we could learn about that water maker before we even left. And okay, that's probably a bit obsessive, but in our particular case, it was the right thing to have done. So there's an element of, if you're prepared and you've got those kind of daily acts of self-discipline, I call them, which it comes down to routine as well. I mean, we felt very much like we fell in sync with each other because of a routine, and that routine is probably what kept us alive.
Interesting, and it's there's some real lessons there in how people should operate in a high performance environment. On that taking that time out, not just being on the task, checking in with each other. There's some real valuable things that obviously you learned as you got through on the row, making sure each other are okay, eating together. There's something good about eating together, isn't there? You chew, it's not so intense. I think that, and in a context, whether it's in a business or any team, that's really valuable, isn't it? That sort of community, social aspect.
Yeah, well, it reduces that kind of high level stress and situation right down to a sort of normality scale, because we eat together every day in ordinary life, right? And I came up with this thing. Neither of us really knew what we wanted to be or who we were, particularly when we left to row the ocean. The whole reason we were there is because we were floundering in life previously. Okay, we'd done other things, but we were in a situation at that point where we both needed something more to focus on. So the whole reason we were there was that. And Tom decided that he would become a teacher, and that's what his passion was, and that's what he wanted to do. And he did subsequently become a teacher. So he learned who he was. He became self-aware. I decided that I was going to continue along the trajectory I was now on and keep adventuring. But I developed a system with him called HART, HART, which is highly accelerated relationship testing. So and it applies in business as well, and it applies to workplaces. So you're all in an unnormal or an abnormal situation with each other. Things are very highly stressed, and once you get to that point of high stress, you then, whether it fails or not, you have to analyze it, and then you can test and improve. And that's kind of how we approached everything.
Interesting. And so I was going to ask, was it the row that you started to really understand who you were and what you were about?
So I think I had the kind of basis of who I was, but things had got in the way and clouded that over the years, because you get involved in a job, and you get a career, and you get family, or you get more heavily involved relationships and things like that, and finances, when you grow up, become a big thing, and your moral obligations to the world are slightly different to they were when you're an 18-year-old running around in different countries. But I definitely believe we both discovered who we are and who we were meant to be on that row. The last, I think, 5 or 6 minutes of our satellite phone package when we reached Barbados, I used to ring my now father-in-law and tell him I was going to marry his daughter in Barbados straight away, having never particularly wanted a family of my own, and said, I know who I am, and I know who I want to be. I want to be a dad. I want a family. We now have 3 daughters, and then yeah.
I presume he said yes and was okay with all that, I guess.
Well, that was the thing. You see, I didn't ask him; I told him, and that was what I knew as well. So I didn't need to ask him. I just knew that I was going to marry him.
So, how would you describe yourself, as in who you are, based on all you've learned over the last number of years?
I don't know. It's really difficult, because you said at the beginning, I describe myself as an adventurer. The reality is, I don't like that term, and other people call me a British adventurer. But I think I'm a daddy first. We had to use 3 words for our new crew for the GB row to describe ourselves, and I think that was probably a good way to do it. I couldn't think of anything for ages, but I think mine was something like relentlessly attempting humility, and that is me fundamentally. Is I'm always trying to help other people first, and I am calm, and I try to see, because I'm also very aware of how negative my thoughts can be, and how quickly things can spiral down. So I try to always be quite positive and find the good in things, and I try to be quite curious about stuff, rather than judgmental, because I find a lot of people, and especially in the past when I've told people I'm going to do this now, the first thing you get is judgment, not curiosity. And so I try to be the other way.
But really, you don't get curiosity. I'm surprised you wouldn't get curiosity with what you're doing.
Yeah, I often am met with judgment more than curiosity.
But that's interesting.
So I prefer to be the opposite of that, basically, and be curious all the time.
Well, no, I'm so that's why I'm interviewing today. I'm curious. I'm nosy. I'm interested in how people tick, how people do extreme things. And that's just not just in sport. I'm talking who people have businesses and want to go from 1 million to 100 million.
Yeah,
that's extreme as well. It's that extreme sense of pushing your boundaries, and getting way out your comfort zone was where not only we grow, and that sounds a bit cliche, but it truly is. So just sort of, I guess, fast forwarding, actually, before we fast forward, you mentioned when you got your backpack when you were sort of 17, 18, when you got to Bangkok, and you said about that was like your freedom. Has that been sort of fulfilled? Do you feel free in terms of how you operate and what you do?
Well, interestingly, so a reason I say about it being representing freedom is because I'm just writing my first book now, and there's a bit that refers to that. I describe the whole scene of that backpack being bought, and me worried that I'm not going to be able to afford it, and that because someone like me, and coming from where I came from, isn't ever going to have these adventures, that it's unrealistic to try and attain them. But the reality is, those were excuses I was making, and I've learned so much over the years. What I got to a point of realizing is after my trips alone, which I did, Southeast Asia and then the Himalayas, Northern India, Russia, a few others, what I realized is that actually, even though I didn't have a family of my own at that time, and I wasn't really responsible for anyone else, I didn't have a responsibility for anyone, they could be considered as quite selfish. And a lot of adventure is quite selfish. So I then decided that because of the freedom I'd had, I'd become quite fulfilled. And because of that, and experiencing other cultures and the things that I'd gained from those cultures on a personal connection level, I decided that anything I did in the future had to be done with an emotional connection and for a good reason. And that reason couldn't just be, well, I wanted to see a different country. So I then started doing a lot of things for charity and various organizations. That was then what gave me even more fulfillment. And the great thing about fulfillment is that once you reach that and you've got that self-awareness level and you're fulfilled, you can start to give because your cup is full. All right. So once that cup is full, you can start to share it out and you can give back. And that is why I do things for charity now and conservation organizations, because what meaning and value does it have otherwise?
Yeah, no, and it's great that you've found that, or got clarity of that purpose why you do these things, which goes to what was the driver for doing 11,000 miles walk around Great Britain?
Yeah.
I say it just really quickly because it doesn't sound very big, but it's massive. It's huge. Yeah.
Well, it's a bit of a paradox because, well, you'll know from working with the GB rowing cruise that it's actually only 2,000 miles to row around it.
Yeah.
But to walk it, it's much further.
Did you realise that?
Well, I didn't. Yeah, I realised the route that I was taking would be approximately 11,000, and part of that is because the estuaries and the inlets and stuff. The other part of that is I decided that I would walk inland and climb the 3 national summits at the same time on the way around. So that added extra mileage. Obviously, I then decided to walk from Norfolk, where was my finish point, all the way along the River Ouse back into Cambridge city centre, where the River Ouse becomes the River Cam, because I row on that river. It means a lot to me, and I thought it would be a nice way to round it off, and it was good for publicity and stuff. But I didn't realise until I got to the Isle of Skye that was nearly 500 miles round on its own, and I just thought, well, why am I doing this?
So what was the I guess the driver that got you to put some boots on one day and literally pack a pack, and then off you go?
Well, it was this kind of moment of perfection in my kitchen, looking out the back door at my children running around in the sun and playing, and my wife was making dough for bread at the same time. So I couldn't imagine a more perfect family scene. And I could smell the dough being made. It was a beautiful summer's day, and it was just coming through that almost to the end of lockdown, that first lockdown period. And the whole way through that period, I was watching my children and doing the home learning with them and playing with them, and I felt like we got closer as a family. Even though we've always been close, I felt like we did so much more together because we just had time. And I remember looking at them and thinking how lucky they were by comparison to a lot of other children in the UK. And I wanted to do something to help children in the UK specifically, and especially because nobody was talking about children in the UK and how bad it was for them to be out of school. And let's remember that for a lot of children, it was hard to be out of school. But for a lot of children, it was far worse being at home in abusive backgrounds, in deprived areas, etc. And some of these areas that people don't believe exist in the UK, they're there. We just don't see them. And so I wanted to do something to help specifically. And I looked at my wife as the sun was shining and the girls were playing. And I said, I think I could go for a bit of a walk around the coast. And she said, okay, which bit? And I just said all of it. But so it seems strange that in a moment of perfection, I would have a desire to ruin it, and effectively. But my wife's so supportive in everything I do, and she's always there, and she's amazing, really. And it was just that I looked up on the Children in Need website, and one of the taglines on their website, the first things I read was "reaching children in every corner of the UK," and that just had that amazing synergy with what I wanted to do. And so it was that it just snowballed from that moment. Really, we talked about it. I wrote a website quickly. I got a Just Giving page sorted out. I spoke to the charity, and 3 weeks later, I left.
Wow, that's pretty quick in terms of planning such a big challenge, isn't it? Within 3 weeks, which is incredible. It just shows that when we get caught up with something, when we get gripped by something, you were gripped by something, and almost that perfection was probably a contrast to what people were not having, which was weird, as you say. But in some ways, I can see why that was sort of paradoxical, but actually highlighted probably the issue more to you.
Yeah, exactly.
But when we get gripped by something, then nothing can stop us, really. It makes us quite invincible. The fact within 3 weeks, because most people planning such a trip would I don't know, a couple of months, maybe in a year to sort of think this through. But there's something about that drive, isn't it, that comes from an emotional connection with something and a bigger thing than ourselves, isn't it?
Absolutely. And over the years, having travelled with various size backpacks, I've whittled my kit down as much as I could to only needing essential bits and pieces and being fairly comfortable with that. And, you know, my wife made a really good point of like, you could take a year to plan this, but from experience from you've had before, that gives people a bigger scope of time to be negative about it. You will convince yourself that you actually don't want to do it. And then she said, what will you regret? And one of the things I talk about with other companies and in talks that I give is this phrase: the excuses we make today become the regrets that we end at the end of our life. And as soon as she said it, what will you regret about it if you don't do it? And I was like, well, that's it, isn't it? I will regret not doing it. Now I've had the idea, I have to do it. And so not taking that time and just having that 3 week period of like, okay, I've spoken to the children, I've spoken to my wife, the extended family know this is what's happening. There's a press release. I'm going. Because it meant I had to get on with it. And it meant that once I'd left, there was no turning back. I just had to move and adapt on the way and get going. And also that hopefully meant that momentum built steadily along the way, rather than me trying to drum up a load of support and it being a journey that wasn't sort of founded in a purity of me just going, I'm going for a walk, this is what's going to happen, hopefully I'll raise some money. Whereas if I drummed up all the press attention straight away and had everything ready and raised loads of money, and people were expecting me to come through their areas, it may have been a wholly different experience. And I didn't want to ask anybody for help. That was one of my rules. If it was offered, I might accept, but I didn't want to ask for help. And that was a way of me kind of gauging an element of human kindness, I guess, and whether it was still there, given that we were so socially disconnected.
And when you set out on that first day, was there any sense of, I say, fear or sense of, I'm not too sure if I'm going to complete this, or was there a, because it's quite a big task, isn't it? And even if you walk round to Land's End, which I don't know how many miles that would be, but that's still quite a big challenge in itself.
Yeah, so, absolutely. So frustratingly, at the end of the first day, I almost had to. I cried myself to sleep in my tent because I thought I was going to have to stop the walk straight away. I injured my knee, and it was playing on an existing running injury that I thought was healed enough for me to walk. But of course, I left literally as soon as the first restrictions were lifted. And so we were pretty good about everything. We were allowed out, once a day for an hour a day exercise or something. I'd gone from rowing 4 or 5 times a week, running 4 or 5 times a week, and being in the gym as well, to maybe walking for an hour a day with the kids. And so thinking my knee was fine, and then suddenly walking 28 miles with a backpack full of kit, I fell off a bit of hard ground in a field. And I just jarred my leg, and it was so painful. And it lasted. I mean, it was really, really bad. I just was on a cocktail of ibuprofen and paracetamol for the next 3 or 4 weeks. The very few family members that I did tell all said, "Go and see a doctor. We'll organise it in an area that you get into. Just go and see a GP. You've got to address this." And they, in hindsight, they're probably right, but I knew going to a doctor would mean they would just say stop walking, and that wasn't an option. So so I ended up stopping taking the painkillers because I knew how bad it would be for my kidneys if I didn't, and for hydration purposes. I bought a strap to stabilize my knee during the day, and at night that strap wasn't quite working. So I don't know if you think about when you lie on your back, and I do lie on my back at night, and you put your feet out, they naturally do that or that. And just my feet doing that was putting enough pressure on my knee to cause me to be in agony and not getting any sleep. So I ended up strapping my leg to my backpack to stabilize it in the night. And so if anybody attacked me in the night or came along, I wouldn't have been able to run away because I had a bag strapped to me. but I did that, and I switched my boots out for a minimum boot, which were lighter weight, and they had a good degree of flexibility in the sole. Sure enough, within a few weeks, the pain had subsided, and then a few weeks later, my knee was getting stronger. Then I got into some hilly areas, and I knew this would be the test, and if I had to stop, I'd have to stop. But it was fine. I got to the South Downs Way. I completed all of that without the strap, and then I would alternate the strap and not the strap every other day, just so that I was, giving it a bit of a break here. So I effectively fixed my own knee.
It was interesting. You just said a minute ago that actually stopping wasn't an option.
No.
And where's that come from? That sort of belligerent grit, determination.
I think that probably came from the Atlantic, because you kind of stop, you're dead. There's no, once you get so far in, there's no point of rescue. Once you get so far in, you might as well keep going. There's no turning back. It's senseless. So, and it's that you've got to know if there is a point where you think, oh, actually, this is too dangerous to carry on. But I've never been in that situation. I've always pushed on, and I've always pushed to a point where I've succeeded. So maybe that's luck, maybe that's foolhardiness and just being bloody minded. I don't know. But I think if you set out to do something, then you need to do it. You don't stop.
When does it come to a point when you do stop? Because obviously, when we are pushing the boundaries of ourselves or of humankind, there's an element of sometimes failure happens, doesn't it? Because you're there first, or you're doing something slightly differently. And as long as we reframe failure as feedback and learn from it. So for you, what's that point when you think, where's the wisdom or moment comes in this, I've got to stop here? Have you not reached that point yet?
No, I mean, so I think the one agreement that Tom and I had, which was, again, in hindsight, is probably stupid. But we even said if one of us died on that boat, the other one would complete and bring the body back. That was how we viewed it.
Wow.
And that's kind of how I see everything now. The only time I would ever stop something is if I was so injured to the point where I lost too much blood, or if I genuinely thought I wasn't physically going to survive, then I might have to. But it would have to have happened. It wouldn't be a case of anticipating an accident. It would have had to happen. I've fallen off cliffs on the walk, for example. I hit my head. There's blood all over a rock. I cut my hands. I slipped off a few other things. I fell into some water and had to swim around to a bay. All of those things are problems. But every problem has a solution if you just, again, like you say, reframe it and think about it calmly. If you panic, that's when things generally go wrong. I mean, I had a pretty hairy experience in Cape Wrath, and I got hypothermia. But there was no point of rescue. There was a storm. I was 2 days walk from civilization in any direction. I fell into a peat bog with a dead sheep, and I was then trying to fight my way out of a muddy, squelchy peat bog with a dead sheep underneath me and trying to clamber out. Before I could get to anywhere remotely safe, I had to jump into a river that was in full spate and swim across with my backpack. And I don't know if you've ever seen or tried to swim with a backpack, but you become like a weird sort of turtle. And it's quite difficult because it fills with water, and so do all your clothes, and then you've got to haul yourself out the other side. But I knew, and I had to make that decision based on the fact that I already had hypothermia setting in. So I knew I was cold. I knew I was wet. what difference would it have made if I didn't try to get across? I would have sat there and froze in the night. Whereas if I got across that river, there was potential that I would find shelter. And if I found shelter, I might be able to get my clothes off, get dry, get warm. And that is eventually what happened.
And do you think that at that moment, was that a pure survival instinct kicking in? Or was that something when you face problems or challenges now, based on your lessons you've learned in your life, how you deal with things calmly? Because sometimes survival can be really helpful. Obviously, clearly, that's why we have it. But sometimes it can't. It can be a hindrance and makes us not helpful.
I think there's an element of both survival and an element of kind of calm scenario planning. The whole of that day, I had been faced with pretty hairy situations, big problems. Storm came in, whiteout visibility was down to about 10 meters. So I was taking a bearing every 20, 30 steps, if that, and I'm relying on really basic navigation skills just to get to somewhere familiar or get to somewhere where it's safe. It was pretty rough going. Motivation is key. My motivation at that point became getting home to my children again at some point, which is an obvious way to keep me going. I've always tried to develop good habits in order to be prepared, and so that whole day, as soon as the first thing changed, which was the weather, I knew that conditions had changed such that I had to start thinking differently. So the whole way through, right up until that point where I jumped in the river, I'd been scenario planning in my head. And, I'm on my own. I've got nothing else to think about, right? So it's not like I can have a conversation with someone. So I'm scenario planning constantly. What if I break my ankle here? How would I get out? What do I do for extraction? How is this possible? What's that possible? Should I be near the cliff edges? Should I come inland a bit? Should I handrail this river? Where can I find food? What's my water source like? What's my situation with rations, etc., etc.? Do I have dry kit? How do I keep it dry? All of that stuff, knowing that when I got to a point where I could get changed again and get dry clothes on, that would help me get warm. Thinking about checking, my rations and my gas situation, all of that stuff you do as you go, because if you don't, it just escalates very quickly. And when it goes wrong, there's no coming back from it.
And was that self-talk really helpful for you as an ongoing process, not only to help you in situations where it's difficult? Because often when we're on our own, sometimes the self-talk can really spiral us down, can't it? We can grab over something negative and suddenly we're off and make something such a big issue that really wasn't a big issue. How did you manage and cope with that? Because obviously you were on your own a lot. I'm sure you met people on the way, but most of the time you were on your own.
Yeah. It's always really hard. And I talk about this because I coach rowing as well. And I talk about this with guys in the boat and women that I coach. Self-talk, even in a boat, is really important, or in a race, in any kind of sporting environment, and probably even in business, because it's a way of you processing not just the things that have happened, but the things that are going to happen. So I always think taking action is key, and doing it sooner rather than later. In business especially, there are people that don't take action for a long time, and suddenly you get this scope creep in a project. It might not just be scope creep, it might be financial creep, but suddenly company's bankrupt, right? Or you've got to lose staff because you haven't taken action when you needed to, and it should have been done right at the beginning when you noticed there was a problem. There's also an element of measuring risk and understanding what needs to be done and when, and that feeds into taking action. And I always like to look at the whole picture. So it's all well and good. It's one of my favorite phrases is you can't eat an elephant whole, right? Well, you can't eat an elephant in one bite. So you break it up into chunks. Those chunks become big roadblocks in a project or in a race or in a walk around Britain. But deal with the big, hard rocks first. Get them out of the way. And then everything else that's small, you can just tick off as little positives. So that's a way of, just getting through anything, I think.
What were when you reflect back, what were the big sort of stones in the road, as it were, going around that sort of 11,000 miles? There must have been some. You've just talked about, obviously, almost had hypothermia. I'm sure. Was there other moments along the way where you thought, this is really tough, I'm not too sure I'm going to get through this or finish it?
Yeah, well, some of the biggest blocks for me were actually nothing to do with the risk to health and my own physical well-being. It was more risk to my mental well-being, risk to my relationships with my family, the negativity that I'd had from friends and family up to that point as well, and on the way around. The excuses, the ordinary things in life that generally matter to us, finance, bills, home, money, children, wife, etc. All of those things, whilst they're important to us, they can end up becoming excuses for you not doing something. And the reality is, if I had the support of my wife and I had the support of my children, nothing else counted, and that was enough for me to keep going. But a lot of the time, hearing the negative thoughts, and like you said before, they go around in your head, and that self-talk can become very negative. I struggled in the beginning, quite early on, not just with my knee, but I had this flooding memory, having been on my own for quite a while, and I got through Norfolk into Suffolk, and I was in a forest, and there's this one day I just had this, something was niggling at me and I couldn't work it out, and I stopped dead in the forest, and I looked around, I was completely alone. There was shafts of light coming through the trees, and I could just hear these trees like creaking in the breeze. That was how isolated and lonely I felt. I could hear the creaking in the trees, right? And I remember standing there thinking, why is this familiar? And why am I feeling terrible today? What's going on in my head? But I took that moment to stop and reassess and think about what was going on, because I just mentally felt exhausted and drained. And what I'd realised is there was a memory of my granddad that was just niggling away at me somewhere. And it was to do with the trees and the things I was seeing, because my granddad and my nan and granddad lived in Somerset in the middle of the countryside, and I used to spend my summers with them. And my granddad got very, very sick not long before I came home from the Atlantic. I then had a very limited amount of time to say my goodbyes to him. I don't know if I didn't deal with the grief properly at the time or something, but I was there being strong for other people, and I was there with him right to the end. I was really close to my granddad, and I just remember him teaching me about trees and about different fungus and things like that. And I was suddenly in this forest, and I was immersed in it, and it was almost like he was there. And I'm not a spiritual person. It was almost like he was there beside me, talking to me about what I was walking through now. And so it became a metaphysical journey from that point. I started thinking more outside the box and addressing my well-being and my mental health, and thinking about the things in my past and in my history that were informing my today. And that became a fascination for me all the way through in the end. So I started writing blogs about it, which I'd never done before. And I feel like that's quite a vulnerable thing, is to write about how you feel, write about the things you're experiencing. And then suddenly I was getting really good feedback and interesting comments about what I was writing and how it was helping other people that were either stuck at home or isolating or whatever, or in similar positions. And then I felt like I got some value. I was giving something back, and there was a meaning to what I was doing. I wasn't just out there selfishly walking around the country, So yeah, it was really, it completely switched from being this amazing endurance physical challenge to actually being a mental battle all the way around. But with that battle came a huge degree of almost enlightenment, I guess, because I learned a lot about myself again.
Yeah, I think when you get yourself in those places of isolation, or even you might be not isolated physically, but isolated doing something on your own, that it's only down to you, that you start to learn more about yourself. But obviously, clearly had some. And I was going to talk about that your well-being, because obviously that's been quite a thing of the last couple of years. People's struggle with their own well-being, mental health.
Yeah,
But it sounds like you had those battles, but almost you sharing those, obviously creating that vulnerability, not only probably helped you, but it sounds like it helps many other people as well along the way.
Yeah, and it wasn't an intentional. It was a product that's come from the walk itself, which it's been a good thing and a benefit. I've got followers all over the world now that message me about their mental health, and it's lovely. It's really it's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah, because we know that when we do something purposeful, it really does help us with our mental health. Something that's bigger than ourselves, isn't it? It pushes us on. And you were obviously doing something, for charity. You're doing it, as obviously a big challenge in who you are, but obviously came bigger than that, and you obviously getting some reward back from the fact people were engaging with you on your journey of this sort of mental health as well. What surprised you along the way, as in whether the people you met, the situations, was anything that sort of surprised you that you weren't quite expecting along the way?
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few things. I suppose the biggest thing was the level of kindness I was shown and received in the end. I don't know if I'm naturally just a very cynical person, but I had so much kindness from people. From people meeting me on beaches with bags of fruit and bottles of water and stuff like that, and people leaving freshly baked cookies and sandwiches outside my tent, and
Oh, really?
then,
I mean, waking up to sort of food there.
yeah, it was amazing. Not every day, but I mean, it happened a lot, and way more than I expected. And even I would walk in and shops would give me stuff for free, or fill up my water for me, or a pub would offer to feed me. And I know that there was a benefit for them for that, because they look good on social media or local news or whatever. And I had like a filmmaker come out and meet me to make a film about me, because he was just so interested in my journey, and all sorts of amazing things. I had people tell me to come and stay in their caravan or on their driveway, or that they had an Airbnb attached to their house, or that when I got to Wales, further around the country or whatever, they had some relatives there on the beach, and perhaps I could stay with them. And it kind of like snowballed like that and became this amazing knock-on effect of people helping me up and down the coast. Really, it was quite incredible. Yeah, it was a massive shock to receive that level of kindness from people. In turn, though, I did have some negative experiences, but the good bits really outweighed those negative.
So it restored your faith in human nature, human
Again, yeah, I know it sounds a bit cheesy and stuff, but it really did restore my faith in humanity a bit. And in fact, the book I'm writing about the Walk of the Coast is it's either subtitled or is going to be called A Journey into Human Kindness.
That sounds a very apt title. And was it 450 days, the journey, wasn't it?
Yeah, 450 consecutive marathons in the end.
My goodness. And so if you were to do it again, what would you do differently, or you wouldn't change anything? Is there anything you do differently?
I'd take a car.
I'd get around a lot quicker, yes.
Yeah, no, I think I would take my family. My girls would be capable of doing it, perhaps not the same distance every day, but and perhaps I would say we don't have to walk it all, but I genuinely believe there are some amazing places on our coastline, and everybody should experience them. They're just, all of it is so varied. I would take my family, and I think that would be a really good learning experience for them. I definitely want to be on or near the sea for the rest of my life. I think that's something that I've been drawn to, and why I've done the challenges I have in the end as well. But yeah, I don't think I would do it too differently. I would have set out in the same way, with not much attention, not shouting too much, and then let it unfold naturally. Because I think if I'd done it another way, it probably wouldn't have become that metaphysical kind of introspective walk that it became. I would have ignored most of that just for the physical side, which was far less important to me in the end than the mental health side.
So I know you don't stop, and so my question is, I know the answer, but because for people to know, what's next for you then, Chris? What's coming up in the next few months?
What's coming up? Well, a lot of busy days and weekends at the moment. So I'm captaining the boat, the Challenger boat for the Sea Legs crew in this year's GB Road Challenge. So having walked around it and looking at the sea for the last 450 days, I'm now going to row around it. And as the bit of a kick in the teeth, it will be that much quicker, and it should only take between 30 and 40 days. But the real part of that is I'm helping this crew achieve something that many of them probably thought that they wouldn't. And also on top of that, it's got an amazing conservation program, lots of really cool scientific data to be collected, which in parts is a world first as well. So that's really cool, working through Portsmouth University. So we leave Tower Bridge on the 12th of June, and we will row up the Thames, turn right, and row until we get back to Tower Bridge, basically.
Fantastic. And what sort of lessons would you bring with you? What would be your one thing if you were going to share with your team in terms of what you've learned, what you've experienced? Obviously, they're bringing their own experience as well, but what would be your learning or your wisdom, I guess, for this trip?
Well, it's very difficult if you're a crew member. I think you can afford to bring all sorts of different things to the table. I think as a captain, you have to be a bit careful about what you're bringing. I think good leadership skills are one thing, but what I like, I take a very kind of not hands-off leadership style, but I prefer to empower people than tell them to do something and be directive. But I hope in anything I do that I can bring a level of humility and positivity. I think in that respect, it should become everybody's own individual experience. Yes, you're doing it as a crew, and yes, that's important. But your experience is going to be different to my experience, and so is hers, and so is his. And that's okay. In fact, it's a good thing, because it's going to be something you take away from it. It's your learning point, not mine. And I don't want to heavily influence that just because I've done other things.
And you're also writing a book. So how far are you in with that?
Yeah, so I'm almost finished the first draft. It's 7 chapters. I've got a foreword from a friend, and I've got a list of acknowledgements at the back, which is cool. I've never written a book, but I've journaled all of my events and challenges and travels. So I've got stacks of books that I could turn into books, hopefully one day. But this book is about the walk specifically, and involves a bit of my background as a younger person. And there's a lot about my family in there, my motivation to do things. It's 7 chapters because 7 is my wife and her sister's lucky number, and they've been pretty seminal in my life. And it's also that all my daughters have 7 letters in their first and second name. So 7 is a bit of a family number. So there's 7 chapters in the book.
Well, it'd be great when that comes out to get that promoted. But I just want to thank you for your time today, Chris. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I could carry on just talking and just being curious about all what you've done. There's so much more in there. And so I do really thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.